All right. Right. So here's the WebDev template that we've cloned from GitHub, and it's copied here on this remote machine. And I can demonstrate how to do it locally, but I just wanted to get you up going, right? To setting up your environment. So server.js, I don't believe I've altered that. Pico server. Let's see oh, okay. So a couple of things I'm going to change here is that some of the code that is already in the template is OpenShift specific, right? OpenShift had a you had to set up the IP address that you're going to listen on and the port that you need to listen on. We don't have that here. We have a bare bones machine, a virtual machine, and we can listen on anything, anywhere we want, right? We're not running like in a shared environment, right? We have the machine all to ourselves. Here, I set it up to just listen at port 3000, app.listen 3000. Okay. See that? This is a JS's mechanism for being able to load other libraries, right? Just like include or import, right? Just like we used it last week for Express. Remember that? When we said var express, require express, right? We did that last Thursday last week, right? But here we have another require, and notice that what it's doing is that it's creating an instance of this file, right? We'll see how it's created, and it's passing it an instance of app, right? An instance of express. You see that, right? So what happens here is that we're passing it along so that this file can keep using an instance of express, right? To keep working and keep defining what the process is. All right. So let me show you what that looks like. So in here, we have a module, right, that we've declared here using module.exports. That's Node.js's mechanism for defining reusable code, right, so that it can be used elsewhere in the Node.js framework. Right? So any other JavaScript file running in Node.js, right, can then, by name, right, by location of the file name, can instantiate this module and use it. In this case, server.js is including this file, right? And it's passing it an instance of app. See that? Way up there. Okay. Then it's using this this app to test your database connection. But again, what we want to make sure at the end of this week is that you have a very basic setup, right, that can also connect to a database. I don't want to leave this to the end of the semester when everyone's going to be running around and says, why can't I connect to the database? Right? I prefer to try to fix it now and do it in the next couple of weeks, right? So we don't have that later on. Now this used to connect to MongoDB either in OpenShift if it was running remotely, or it was connected to the local database if it was running on your local machine. Here, I changed it so that it's using an instance of MongoDB running on MLab, right? MongoLab. MongoLab is it's a service. It's a product as a service that allows you to run MongoDB instances on the cloud, right? And then you can set up a URL, right? And you can log into and connect to that remote database, right? And here I have the username, password, right? The name and the IP, the name of the machine that's listening in a particular port. Okay. It's a test. It's a dummy database, so I don't mind giving you the username and password. It's just to test whether the connection works. After that, this is code that we're not yet ready to take a look at. I'll just very quickly, it's loading a library called Mongoose, right? That it's a higher level API that allows you to talk to the database, right? At a higher level, right? So that you can insert, you can query, you can delete, you can update, everything you would expect that you can do with the database. Yes, right? We'll talk about this halfway through the course. We'll come back to this on what does the API look like to connect to the database. So, but basically, it supports the capability of just testing whether your database connection is working. Right? There is in the running instance, you should be able to insert a small piece of text into a database that's been posted to a database, right? So that you'll know that your database is running, right? That you're connected. One of the first things that will happen is that if you try to run your server.js without the database running, right, it'll fail. It says, "Oh, sorry, I can't connect to the database. It's not running." So before you run the server, you need to have a running database. You have MongoDB running on your server on your machine. It will look for that, right? So you can try to connect. If it's not there, it'll fail. Once it's able to connect, this piece of code tests, right, that you can insert, you can delete, you can read stuff from the database and list it in your in a very trivial application. Okay, so you need to get that working by the end of this week. This is local. Okay. Right. So this documents connecting to the AWS. For Mongo, you have several options. Right. One of them is MongoDB itself. MongoDB is the folks who created MongoDB. They have what called MongoDB Atlas, right? That allows you to create instances of MongoDB on the cloud, right? But it's a 4K file, right? So it's up to you, right? I don't know if they have like an education or an EDU version that it's free. Maybe there is. If you do find something, please let everybody else know. But integrate very easily with AWS. If you go to Mongo Atlas, okay, you can sign up and create an account there, and you can start creating clusters. Right? It'll create a cluster. The smallest cluster that creates is 3 databases, right? Running in tandem that allow you to replicate the database across several machines. So build a new cluster. If you create them, build a new cluster. The smallest size cluster is a 3. It's 3 machines. You can select the region, and the smallest is 3 cents an hour. Okay, that's the smallest. So go $6 a month. You have to create an admin, user admin, right, so you can log in and manage the cluster. You need to set up your payment information. Once you have the cluster running, they give you what the URL is for you to connect to, right? So you can copy this URL and paste it in here, right? This is the URL, the connection string that you need to connect to MongoDB. You can copy it. The password's not pasted here, but you'll remember what the password was. You'll need to wait a couple minutes before the machines get up and running, right? So that they're listening in the cluster. And that's MongoDB Atlas. Or to use MongoLab. MongoLab is mostly free if you're within 500 megabytes. Okay, if you're not going to have much more data than that, it is free. If you want to go beyond that and use much more storage, then you need to pay. But the first 500 megabytes is free. Right? You can create an account here. This is the one. You create the account. Once you create the account, you can log in. They create a dummy database for you, but you can create several databases, right? If you click on that database, it'll display the connection string right here: MongoDB username, password, and then the name of the machine and the database you will connect to. Okay. You'll need to create a user, right? this is not the same user that you logged in that created an account, or you need to create several users that can connect to the same database. So you click on users. You create a users, you can say add new user. There it is, I created myself, gen user, you can put whatever password you want. Once you have the user, right, you can then use it here, username and password as a connection string to connect remotely from Node.js. All right. Anyway, those are 3 alternatives. One for Amazon. If some of you have approached me that you prefer to use maybe Heroku, fine. If you already have an account on Heroku, then use Heroku. Otherwise, AWS is fine. Other folks have pointed out maybe Node.js. Node.js is also an option, right? If you're familiar with Node.js, that's fine. You can use that instead, right? Or if your provider needs to spin and install Node.js, by all means. Right? So I'm not gonna force you to use one or the other. Okay, so whatever environment you feel comfortable in, go ahead. I'm just giving you a couple options. Right? AWS, I believe, just on its own, it's a good thing to practice and at least you put your resume. Yes, I'm familiar with cluster environments and cloud computing. Brand is worthwhile your time. All right, so let me quit out of here. Let me close. We were taking a look at To Do last week, weren't we? And let's see, how far did we get? Right, so we created a very trivial Node.js application. We saw that we could connect to it and say hello. It is respond with hello. Hello world. So this is our hello world express. We then extended a little bit so that we can host static content, right? We created a public directory. We dropped in there some HTML, maybe some CSS, some JavaScript, right? Again, from Node.js's point of view, anything you drop in the public directory, asking you, right? It's not generating this HTML on the fly, right? It's all static. From the point of view of the browser, right, this content is not going to be static, right? We're going to be using JavaScript on the browser to dynamically manipulate the content DOM, right? So we're gonna put in the public directory some static content such as app.js and index. Let's see, in index.html, what do? Well, we created some very trivial HTML document with a head tag at the top and a body. Does everybody feel comfortable with HTML already? Do you need me to go over HTML? Is everybody okay with HTML? Anybody needs a refresher, or we could have like a clinic separate. Yeah, I'm expecting that you're already familiar with the basics of HTML and the basics of CSS, but we'll go over as we go. So this is a trivial HTML document that as content in the body, we had just a header saying that this is a to-do list. We had and that's all we had. And let's run this. Also, I suggested that you create a runtime configuration for your server so you can run it right from within the IDE as opposed to running it from the terminal. Right? If you run it from the IDE, you get the benefit of being able to debug the server. Okay, and I would expect that if you run into problems on the client or the server, that you've already invested some effort into debugging it yourself. Right? When you come to see us, I like to see that you put breakpoints in places and watch some variables, and don't just come to us blind and say, "Oh, this doesn't work." Right? So and help me. So shows that you need to put some effort into analyzing expected scale to in this class, right? So yeah, so let's run this server. Okay, there it is, running at the bottom, and it's listing at 3,000. So let's visit that. Localhost 3,000, and I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. There it is. Right now, but I mean, I have in public. I have an index file, and the index file didn't load. Index. Why are you not loading? Okay, my index file is not loading. Okay, let's look at the inspected. See if it's complaining. Aha, it's complaining. It's saying that it can't find to-do app. Okay. All right, that means that if you go to index.html, you see this to-do app right here. Angular is complaining, saying, "Hey, I don't see this to-do app anywhere." If we look at the script here, the script tag is loading app.js. Loaded right here. This app.js, there it is, there's Angular. And it's declaring module, and it's declaring to do. It's weird. Oh, okay. So I must have perhaps missed closing the script tag. Okay, it was complaining that I didn't have a close script tag. Okay, so there it is. It still doesn't do anything, right? I can type here and click. Nothing is happening, right? All right. So this is the dumbest Angular application. It doesn't really do anything. It only declares that this is a node, an Angular application, right? And for this to work, these two strings need to match. This naming of the app right here needs to match. Right? ng-app is one of many Angular directives. Okay. And you know that it's Angular because it starts with the namespace ng dash. Okay, anything ng is an Angular attribute or element or directive. Okay, right now this directive is being used as an attribute by the Angular framework. Angular allows you to declare any number of new attributes, new tags, new classes, right, that add behavior to your code, right, to your HTML code, right. You could redefine HTML. If you don't like HTML, you can redefine it, right, to make it behave just like you want it, right. And here, it's being used as an attribute to declare it as an application. All right, great. So what do we want to do here? Well, one of the things that we want to do here is that as I click on as I click on the new to do, perhaps what I like to do is add them to a list underneath, right? And then it allows me to perhaps delete them from there, right? So if I click on new to do, I like it to show up underneath. If I click again, a new to do. Edit it, and basically do the 4 or 5 operations that we need to do on anything, right? But typically, there are 4 or 5 operations that we care about. We need to be able to create things, right? We need to be able to update things, delete things, right? Or get the details about one thing, whatever it is, or get things, yes? Whatever they are, right? Yes? But that's true for any entity that we want to work with, right? And you'll hear me say this over and over as we progress in the semester, right? Whenever you want to, manage any particular object, there's 4 or 5 basic operations that you want to be able to operate on any one thing, right? Or any one entity, right? Here, our entity is a to-do. Yes, we need to create them, delete them, list them, right? Or retrieve the details of one of them. Yes? All right, we can't do any of those just yet. Okay, what do we want to do? So we want to be able to listen for this to-do click, this click button over here.
So to do that, we need to tell Angular, we need to tell the Angular application what is the HTML that is responsible for. We could say that it's the entire document. It says, hey, Angular, you're responsible for the entire document. You're going to be rendering all the things that are in this document. Or we can give it a smaller scope. Right? Say, well, no, you're only responsible for this little piece. Okay? And the way we do that is by defining scopes. Right? We can define scopes using who is responsible for that little piece of the real estate, right? So, for instance, we're going to say that this button and the input field and the list, all that is going to be the responsibility. To say that everything inside of this div is going to be the responsibility of Angular. Anything outside of that div, it won't be the responsibility of Angular. Okay? In that way, we can define scopes. You can say, well, this portion of the page is a responsibility of this piece of code, right? And this other part of the page is the responsibility of someone else. Right? We can break it up. Or we can be lazy and just say, well, the entire page is the responsibility of just one person, right? That's lazy, right? We want to be able to break up things. So let's break it up and say, okay, so this div is going to be handled by a to-do controller. Okay. So here we're binding code that's going to be responsible for the content of that div, right? And by using a new Angular attribute called ngController. Controller. Here we see the first use of the idea of model view controller, MVC. Right? It's a design pattern, right, that has proven very effective and very useful in the last 15, 20 years, and that forces us to think about applications as 3 different buckets. Right? You could think of all the various things that can go into an application. It's easier if you break it up into 3 different buckets. Either the view, right, meaning anything that is that directly interacts with an end user, right, the buttons and the input fields and the lists and the things that look pretty, right, things that the user sees immediately on their screen. I refer to that. All the boring stuff that all the logic that goes behind the page that says, oh, well, you click this and that happens, and this and that and this other thing happens, right? That's the controller, right? That's the controller part. We have the logic that says that maps user interaction, user affordances, or user gestures, right, to logic. Right? And that's the controller. So, and here's where the first that connection first happens. View, the div, the input fields, the buttons, all that is view. Okay, all that is view. But who's responsible for handling the clicking and the typing and the updating of the data? Who's responsible for that? The controller is responsible for that. And this is where the glue happens, right? We're saying, hey, controller, you're responsible for that view. Right? If anything happens to that view, you are responsible for it. If they want to add a new to-do list, they'll let you know, right? If they want to edit it, anything happens here, you're responsible for it. So to do that to this controller, we need to create that controller. We need to declare this controller. So the way we do that is we go back to the application here. Now I'm doing a lot of shortcuts. I'm doing a shortcut because I like to complete this by the end of this class. But as we go through the semester, we won't be doing shortcuts. So I will be saying, okay, this is not the way you do it in a large team where you have lots of people working together in all sorts of ways, right? This is the way you should do it, right? So a lot of what we'll see throughout the semester is we'll revisit a lot of these things that we're going to be talking about today, but saying, hey, this is not the way you do it, right? That's not industry standard. Here I'm taking a lot of liberties, just because I like to quickly complete it by the end of the class. So here I'm going to declare a controller, right? So Angular, after having declared that this is an application, I can then declare any number of controllers. Right? I can declare
I might have many views, one for the login, one for registration, one for your profile, right? I can have many different views that are dedicated for different purposes, right? And they all have their own controller. Okay, so right now we only have one page, so there will only be one controller, right? You can have any number of controllers, so you can break it up, right? And not necessarily in one single file. Typically, you have it into many different files, right? Each team member can dedicate their focus on that subset of the application. So let's declare the controller. It's to-do controller, and then by name. So this name needs to match that name. Okay. And then once we have that, we need to declare the implementation. Who implements this? It's going to be implemented by a function of the same name, or you can give it a name, right? Whatever. Right, as long as you have a function called whatever. Okay. Right, so here's the declaration to do control, which maps to the text in the HTML. And this maps to the function that instantiates that controller. So this is a constructor that gets instantiated and implements that control that is responsible for that HTML. Yes? Do it again. I'm not going to call it whatever. Right. What I do is I tend to use the same name all across so that I don't go crazy. Maps to this, that maps to that, right? So that I don't have to think too much, right? So if I do a console log, hello, I could type hello controller, and I refresh. If I inspect this. Look at the console. Notice it says hello from to-do controller. So indeed, that controller was instantiated. It was instantiated because Angular found it. Right? Angular was parsing this. It says, this is a to-do controller. Like there must be a function of that who declares that, right? It found it and instantiated. All right. So what I want to do is that if I click on this button, I like to notify the controller and say, hey, they want to add a new to-do. Yes. And we can do that using ng-click. ng-click assigns an event handler that says that by somebody. Who? We can say a function, something like new to do. Right? Where's this function declared? In the controller. The controller declares that function. Right? So to declare it, the way that the controller and the view, the way they talk to one another, the way they interact, right, is through a variable, right, called scope. Right, $scope. It's actually a service, right? Basically, it's the object that represents the view. This object represents anything that the view declares. For instance, this function call. Anything that the view declares, it will be accessible to the controller through this variable, right? And anything that the controller declares through this variable will be available in the view. Right? This scope object allows these two folks, the view and the controller, to talk to one another, right? And we call it through a technique called two-way binding. Right? Whatever the view does to the scope, the controller knows about it. Whatever knows about it. Right? There's two-way binding. Right? They notify each other if anything happens. Right? If the controller somehow changes something in the scope, the view automatically gets updated. If the view changes something, somebody types something on an input field and it's bound to the scope, the controller knows about it. Right? We'll see how that works. So the right? Notice that if I run this, right, and I try to click on new to do, nothing happens, right? But if I go here, I can declare, I can say, hey, there is a function, new to do, that we can say console.log. I click on the to do, nothing. Oh, there it is. 3 times I've clicked it. right? So it's running. It is. We see that it is working, right? That I click on it, right, and the control is being notified, and this function is executing, right? This function is now, this new to do is bound to this new to do. Everybody okay? Everybody still with me? Right? Okay. So what do we really want to do? What we really want to do that, right? If you were using jQuery, anybody use jQuery? Familiar with jQuery? Right? What you'd probably be doing is assigning, IDs or classes to this, right? And then from JavaScript, grabbing the hold of that DOM elements, right? Then assigning some behaviors. Here, Angular takes a completely different approach, right? What Angular does is that says, you know what, the controller is a high level. You do not have to know anything about the low level view, right? Classes, IDs, all those things are the world of the view, right? Who's supposed to use those classes and those IDs? Maybe CSS, maybe, right, to style it. But it should not be the responsibility of the controller to know anything specific about the view, right? The only thing that the view is going to have a very high level thing of the view, okay? Like for instance, this function has a name. That's all it knows, right? It doesn't really know that it's associated with a particular button, right? Or it doesn't even have to be a button, right? It could be anything, right? You can assign IDs or classes. The controller is never going to know anything about specifically what is going on in the view, right? It only receives these high-level communications, right? Hey, they click on that. And the controller says, oh, okay, well, let's see. I'll do something about it, right? So what about this input field? How do I do this, right? How do I get a hold of the input field? Well, what we do, again, a high level, we're going to say that this is going to be mapped to a variable, right, of a particular name. So we'll call it name. And now through the scope, I can get a hold of it, right? I can get a hold of it. I can say new to do name, right? So if I type something here, right, and I say new to do, notice that I have it in the controller, right? The controller can now see what's going on in the view, but notice that it doesn't know that it's an input field or it has or know anything specific about the HTML. It should not need to know. Right, there is a very well-defined division of labor here, right? Anything about classes, IDs, that's presentation, that's view, right? The controller will never know anything about the DOM in particular, right? Even though it doesn't know about the DOM, it can manipulate the DOM, right? And we'll see in a minute. So if I type, it reaches the controller. Everybody okay? All right. Okay, so what do we want to do here? What we want to do is, as I click new to do, right? Somehow I like to be able to collect these things, perhaps in an array or some kind of collection, right? And then somehow render them in the front end as these are all the to do that you've told me, so that you have a history of all the to dos that you've added. So to do that, what we could do is declare an array, also on the scope, right? To-dos, an empty array, right? Notice that it's being bound to the scope. That means that the view sees this array. Okay? The view says, "Oh, I know about the array." Okay? So what we could do is perhaps create a little object that has as an attribute name, right? And the value is the name that you gave me. And then I can add this new to-do object into the array, right? We can say scope to-dos dot push to do. Yes, right? Back in the view, notice that to-dos is available to me in the view, right? So I can go back to and render them, right? One way to render them very quickly, right, is to use these curly brackets. These curly brackets right? Right? That the placeholders, right, that can be manipulated by an Angular and replaced with actual values. Okay, they're very much like what's happening here, right? What's input doing, right? Input is saying, hey, I'm bound to this variable, and whatever you type in the input field is bound to this name. Yes, right? But the value of you typing is inside of that box, right? Inside of that widget, right, that renders the text. If you want to display text but not bound to any particular elements, you can use curly brackets. Right? The curly brackets allow you to insert the data wherever the piece of text wherever you want, not necessarily as part of a field of elements. Right? Here is just a free form, perhaps embedded in additional text. Right? You can free form add text inside of just plain other plain text. For instance, I can say here name. See that? Look at that. If as I type, notice what's happening. See that template, right? These two are bound, right? It says this name is a variable that is being manipulated dynamically as I type. Yes, and that's what this is displaying. And over here, I'm saying, hey, whatever happens to name, I want to know about it, right? So Angular sets up this fairly intricate and sophisticated mechanism where you have listeners and observers, right? And you have broadcasters of events, right? As you type, whoever had displayed any interest in that variable gets notified. Right? So wherever name is, right, gets notified of whatever happens to name. For instance, this little template down there, see that? Well, he's definitely interested in the value of name, right? So Angular sets up this intricate mechanism that broadcasts the element change. Anybody care about this? This template, again, Ruby, Angular, MVC, declares an interest in the value of names. Says, hey, yeah, I want to know about it, right? So everybody who have declared any interest in these values gets notified. So, okay, well, here's the latest value of name. Go ahead and do whatever you want with it, right? And renders. This is all. I don't have to do any of that. If you're doing this with jQuery, you would have to put a key listener, right? And somehow, go back and listen for all this, iterate over all the spans that had any interest in this, and then update their HTML content. It's pretty elaborate, right? This is all happening implicitly. And all that mechanism is happening implicitly with the understanding, right, that there is a double binding. The umbrella term is two-way binding, right? Everything is bound that have references, and whatever happens to that reference gets notified across the entire system. Yes? These are all implicit. You can create explicit event handlers as well, right? Where you want to maybe insert yourself in that mechanism, right? And broadcast exactly what you want to be notified for. Right now, this is the implicit behavior. This is out of the box behavior, which is pretty sophisticated just on its own, right? I can even we can put this in around with any styling, and this still works fine, right? So it's just embedding it. And if you look at the content behind, and it's changing as I type. See that? DOM is being manipulated as I type. But nowhere did the controller or anything did I explicitly take a look at H2 and modify it directly, right? All this is happening implicitly. Okay, very, very powerful. So anyway, so just like I can do with name, I can also do with to-dos. Oops. Where's to-dos? Who declares to-dos? The controller declared to-dos, right? And at first it's empty, yes? But as I add things into to-do, I am pushing into that array, yes? So if I click here and I refresh, and notice that it already rendered an empty an empty JSON array, right? So it already understands that colons and commas and everything, and I'll render it nicely, right? So if I type to do here, so to do one, new to do, notice that it renders the array. Do two, right? It just keeps pushing into that array and displays it in a native raw JSON format. Again, very, very powerful, especially for debugging. At the bottom of the page, so you can display variables as you interact with them. That's a great mechanism that allows you to see things live, right? That of the actual data that is being generated in that you're about to render. Okay. So anyway, so that's a very trivial way of displaying a to-do. What I really like to be able to do is perhaps maybe display it in a tabular format, right? Where you might have all the to-dos on one of the columns, and maybe some buttons on the right-hand side where you allow you to manipulate them, maybe delete them or edit them or do something with them. Yes. Remember the CRUD operations, right? The only CRUD operations we have so far is create, right? The C in CRUD. Right? Sort of we could list them, right? But in a very raw format. So let's do something more interesting. What I'd like to be able to do maybe is perhaps have a little table here, and maybe have a T head. I have here a row. The name of the to-do on one of the columns, and maybe the actions, right, that you can take on that particular to-do, right? So let me render that. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, name and action, and maybe underneath we can have T body and T row here and TD here. So here's I like maybe a button that allows me to delete it. So maybe a button here that says delete to do. So just to see how it would lay out. Okay, that's the way we'll lay out. So what I'd like to be able to do is that this TR, right? What I'd like to be able to do is take this and render one row instance of to-do objects that I have in the array, correct? Right, so we could do that. In Angular, it's very easy to grab a piece of code and say that this is a template which I'm going to use to copy and paste this over and over and over for every instance that I might have in a collection. Okay, I can very easily say that I'm going to iterate. I want to grab this piece of element, this TR, right? I want to repeat this. Right? I want to copy this and paste it over and over. For every to-do in the to-dos. Okay, so again, ng-repeat is an Angular attribute, right? It's a directive, right? Here is what? Copy this DOM element, right? And then just create new instances of this DOM element over and over and over for every instance in this collection, which we know is the array that we are creating. Yes, we were rendering before in raw JSON format. Yes, so we know there's a whole bunch of instances there, and what this is going to do is going to iterate as every instance into this local variable called to do. Yes. So we could render the to do here. You could just say render the to do. Notice that this is a local variable, right, that only has the meaning inside of this scope. Okay? Right? It's a local variable that only is used within this TR. It only has values inside of this TR. Okay? So if we re-render this, and I say to do 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, Notice that it's adding, right? All these. This is the entire array, right? And now it's iterating. See that? It's iterating and displaying, this 2 and 3, right? Each one in its own row, right? Notice the delete to do. And this is the name, 2, 3, 4, and 3, 4, 5. Yes? Right? Typically what you want to be able to do is not display the object. That's ugly. We could maybe perhaps display just to do stop. Right? So any of the attributes inside of the object, you can access them through the dot notation. So if I re-render this, there it is, right? It's displaying it as we go. Everybody okay? Everybody still with me? Right. One other thing that we can add to this, I'm going to add. And I'll add another column here. I think this should be THs, not TDs. TH. And this, I'm going to call it index. So since these are all in these to-dos are in a collection in an array, right? They are automatically assigned an index, right? So the first element is at index 0, index 1, so on and so forth. Right? And oftentimes we can use that index for logic, right? Maybe I want to paint the odd elements in a particular color and the even number in a particular color. Right? I need the index, right? So index are useful. And so as we iterate, this entry repeat creates variables that are specific to the task of iteration. And one of those variables that it creates as it iterates is the index. Oops. The index variable. This index variable only has meaning inside of this repeat. Right? It is the current index as it iterates over the array of to-dos. Right? Notice that it has a $sign. If it's a $sign, it's typically a variable that is part of the infrastructure, right? Of the framework. The framework is creating these things for you, like $scope. Right? $scope is a variable that is being created for you by the overall, the framework that you're embedded in. Okay, we're not obviously this only works because of some context. Yes, because it's an ng app, right? If I re-render this and say there it is 0, 1. Okay, I can just add a whole bunch of them, right? And there they are, the index on the left-hand side. Make sense? Everybody good? All right. All right, so now that we know the index, perhaps we can go a little bit. I want to remove one of these guys, right? I want to remove one of these to-dos. What I could do is, again, notify the controller. Hey, I want to remove to-do number 4, right? And then what we could do is on the controller says, oh, okay, well, let me find the number 4, splice it out from the array, right? And once the array has been spliced out, it will notify the view that something happened, right? That the array is now has one less element, and that it should re-render. Re-render the HTML. So let's do that. So this button over here, we could say, hey button, if somebody clicks on the delete button, we're going to say ng click. We're going to say remove or crud delete. So call it delete to do. And like that, right? Now, what we could do is pass it as an argument. We pass it as an argument the index, right? The index of the element that we want to remove, right? Which is pretty cool, right? It's pretty interesting that we can pass the argument, and this argument will be different for every element as we iterate, right? If you click on the third one, it'll say delete number 2, delete number 4. Yes. So we say $index. Right, so we go back and we declare that. We say scope dot delete to do. It's a function that receives the index, right? And in the console we can say removing, remove index. Right. So if we if we iterate over this again, right, and on the, we can say on the console, notice that I have on the right-hand side the console at all times, right? This is something you should become familiar with. To practice it, you always have not only what you're rendering, but also the debugging console. And so you can step the code, you can see the variables as you go, and you can break points. Right. So for instance, if I click on this one, notice it says remove 2. Right? If I click on 4, right, it says remove 4. See that? Right. So we have in the controller, we have we have the information about the element specific. Object's point of view, it's easy, right? We grab the original array. We grab the original array, and we're going to splice. We're going to say remove the element from this position. Right? Which position? Position index. And how many do we want to remove? We just want to remove one element, right? Just that one. Okay. Splice in JavaScript, which allows you to insert stuff into an array, allows you to remove stuff from the array. If the second argument over here, this one over here, is 0, then that means that we're not deleting anything. We're inserting. Right? If it's other than 0, it means that you are removing. Okay, that's the interpretation. Okay, since this is different than 0, then this is being interpreted as remove the element at position index. Just remove just that one. Make sense? Right? And then we said after removing, we need to notify the view. No, we don't need to notify anything, right? Because remember, double binding. Whatever to the data, right? Everybody who cares about it gets notified automatically. Okay? Who cares about this array? The view. Right? The view has a repeat, entry repeat on this variable, right? It will be notified. It says, hey, this array has changed. Right? You need to update yourself. Yes. The arguments. The first one tells you the elements, right? The index of the element that you're operating on. Right? If the second argument is if you are removing, this needs to be different than. I'm sorry. If it is different than 0, and then this is interpreted as you are deleting, right? The element at position index. If it's 0, that means that you're not at position index. If you're adding, then that means that you need to have an additional something else, right? You said, well, this is what I'm adding, right? You can add just a single. You can add an object. You can add an array of objects, right? If you're adding, and this would be 0. That's if you're adding, right? You're adding things into the array. If you're adding things into the array, it has to be 0. And you're adding where? You're adding at position index. Right? If you are removing, this says how many you want to remove. I want to remove 12 elements, starting at position this. And if that's true, then I don't need this third argument. Okay? So we're using a very simple at position index, remove just one element, that one element. Yes? Make sense? All right. So let's see. Let's refresh. And let's say to do 1, 2, 3. I'll add that first. Then I'll say 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So we have the array in raw format at the bottom, and then rendered as a table. So we're going to remove this one right here. If I click on it, notice that it's gone. Notice that it's no longer in the array. It's no longer in the array, and it's no longer DOM. It's gone from the DOM. That's the most important part here, right? I didn't have to notify the view that hey, you're out of date. I didn't have to iterate again, right? I didn't have to broadcast or notify the DOM or manipulate the DOM anyway. I noticed that
again, because of the double binding, right? Angular, again, the default behavior is that, hey, this changed, I need to update this. Right? And I was responsible for anything that was rendered in this repeat, right? If the original was used for rendering this, if it changes, I need to update the DOM accordingly. Okay? And it's smart. It's also very, very smart in that it won't render the entire DOM. Say this is thousands of elements, right? It would be very, very expensive to, just because I'm removing one single element in the array, in the DOM, that it will have to throw away all the DOM and regenerate the entire DOM, right? It would be very expensive. Used to render it, I will only remove that piece of the DOM, right, and leave everything else untouched. Yes. Yeah, this is all browser. More primitive, you would have like a form, right, where each one asks. One pushes data into a central Node.js, right, and everybody else polls, says, hey, has anything happened? Right, and then they get broadcasted the values to all of them. Or they can use WebSockets, which is more a little more modern, right, and they can broadcast it back onto all everybody who's listening. No. No, the browser here is not talking to Node.js at all. So, this is very fast. Well, some argue that it's not. But yeah, it is pretty fast. Pretty fast. It's fast enough. Yeah, this is not going to the server at all. Right? This is doing DOM manipulation on the browser. For this example, we don't even need Node.js at all. Right? We just open up that file, right, on a process on the browser, right? Just skip Node.js on that. These examples, for the next, I would say, 4 weeks, we won't really need Node.js. We'll come back to it because at some point we'll say, we're going to reach a limit and says, okay, well, I want to store these things to do this. Where do I store them? Where do I put them? So that we'll need to store it somewhere. We'll need to send it back to Node.js. Node.js can store it in RAM, right, which is longer term, yes, but still not as long as we need to. Right, so the following week we'll go back and say, well, actually, let's store it in the database in MongoDB. Right, so that's a progression. We'll do things in the front end first. Right, put around there. We'll come to the limit of right, and then we'll introduce MongoDB. Yes. Callbacks, yes. This one, eternally, yes. These are all callbacks calling each other, yes. But you can hook into those mechanisms. Typically, you don't have to. No, yes, we will be posting and putting and deleting on the database server and listening for callback as a response from the server. Yes. Yeah, we'll have to do that because but that's because they're synchronous. The reason you do this is because the communication is asynchronous. Yeah. This is all synchronous, so we don't need that. Yes. So it's just MVC running. This is MVC running, and that's what Angular is, right? Angular is an MVC framework for the client only. Okay, it has all the libraries that it needs to communicate with the server and post changes on the server and make them permanent. Okay, and we'll do that in a minute. Yes. Yep. There's different mechanisms. They can be nested, so child controllers know about their parents. They can also declare a common service. They can all update the service, right? And anybody who has access to that service can share all the data in that service. We'll talk about that. Yes. So the model represents the data. Yes, the M here in the MVC is the data. Right? So basically, in MVC, that's one of the three buckets, right? One of the buckets is view, which is only responsibility is displaying things to the end user. The controller is the one who's responsible for interpreting user interaction as a type or clicking or dragging, right? And basically the logic that goes behind that, right? What has to happen? And what typically happens is that the model, the data is being manipulated, right? We're adding new instances, we're removing instances, we're updating existing instances. It is the model. In our case, the model is a very trivial model. It's just scope. Scope is the model here, right? It's holding all the data. Right? And who's changing that? The controller is changing the model. It's pushing, right? It's splicing. It's going to be updating in a minute, right? And the view just listens for changes in the model and says, I need to update myself. I have to re-render. Right? It's like this circle, right? The view generates events, the controller updates the model. Once the model gets changed, the view re-renders. This infinite loop that just goes over and over and over. Okay. All right, so we have the delete to do. How about if I want to be able to modify an existing to-do? So what we could do is that we can add an additional button here, right, where we can say like select to-do, select to-do, and it says this is the to-do that I want to edit, right? We're going to tell the controller, says, hey, okay, select to-do, there it is. So what we want to be able to do is say if I type something here, right, and have several to-do, when I select that to-do, I'm going to copy the text back into the form, right? So I can edit it. And then say, okay, save it, right? So let's focus on first being able to do that you selected, and then copy it into the field above, right? So let's do that. So here I'm saying we're saying select this to do, and I'm passing the index of the element that I want to change, right? So in the app here, we're going to declare scope dot do as a function index, and we're going to receive the what we want to edit. Okay, and notice that the to do is in that location, right? It's in scope to dos, right? Sub index, right? That's the to edit, correct? Right? So what we're going to do is that we're going to set the name, right? That's the name. It's this input field here, right? This input field is called name, right? We're gonna set the name equal to the to-do that you just selected, right? Name. See that? We're gonna grab the name from the to-do you just clicked on, right? And we're gonna copy it onto the input field, right? So that we can see what the previous version was, right? And then change it. So we don't have to type the whole thing again, right? We're going to just do something minor. So for instance, if I say here 1, 2, 3, 4, right? If I select here, notice that it becomes 3, 4, 5, or 1, 2, 3, or 4, 5, 6. You see that? Okay. and then click on a button that says update the to-do, right? So change it, put it where it was, right? To do that, we're going to need an additional button here. Instead of new to-do, we'll call it update to-do. Update to-do, so update. Okay, and in the update function, what we could do is say update to-do function, and this is what are we going to do? We need to do what? We need to update. This is copying from the old to-do to the form. Now we have to reverse it, right? We need to go from the form and update the object. Yes? So basically, I need to reverse this line equal to the scope name. Yes? But which index? Which one do we need to update? Somehow we need to be able to remember which is the one we had selected. Yes? Right? So what we're going to do here, we're going to remember and say we're going to say scope selected to do index. We're going to store the index there so that we remember next time we come around, so that when we update, we can use that stored index. Yes, right? So let's do that. So let's refresh. New. Okay. So if I select here, I can still select it, right? Again, no need to go into that particular row and update that particular cell, right? Or use any DOM manipulation, any class. All that, again, is very object-oriented, right? Basically, what you have to do is in the controller, always be thinking as an object, from an object's point of view, right? No longer will you be dealing with low-level jQuery where manipulating low-level DOM elements. Yes, jQuery still has its place. Underneath this, right, Angular uses jQuery. Underneath Angular uses a light version of jQuery, right, a very small subsection of jQuery. All that you really need to manipulate DOM, right, as its layer. Right? Programming in an object-oriented way, right? Instead of thinking at the low-level DOM. Make sense? All right. So this is all good. I have all the CRUD operations, right? Here's the create, right? And the C of create, we can read. Right? If I give you, I can retrieve one particular to do, right? And it for you. I can display all of them. I can delete an individual one. I can update. So I have all my CRUD operations. So I'm done. Right? The problem is that if I refresh this page, right, everything's gone. It doesn't survive a page refresh. Right? And obviously this is unacceptable. Somewhere I need to be able to store this, so that if I come tomorrow and log in, I can see my to-dos. Right? Where do I store it? We could store in the browser. The browser does have a small database where you can store things locally on the browser. It stores in the local file system, but then it will be only stored on that browser. Right? And somebody could just clear the memory for that browser, and it's all gone. Right? So we need something a little more permanent. Okay? So one place where we could put it that is much more permanent is to send it back to the server. The server certainly has a longer lifespan. Right? So what we could do is that when we do a new to-do, right? When we do a new to-do over here, right? We don't actually manipulate the model here. Right now, the model is being manipulated. Everything's in the browser, right? But none of this is permanent, right? So what we do instead is send this over to the server. Hey, server, please store this for me, right? To do that, we're going to use another service. Just like Scope is a service that allows us to talk to the DOM, right? There's another service that allows us to talk to the server, okay? Or to talk to anything out there on the internet. Okay. So to the browser,
right, through an object model. And then there's another service called HTTP that allows to talk to HTTP resources, right? For instance, our server. Our server is an HTTP resource, right? So for instance, one of the things that we could do in the 8 minutes that I have, when we do a new to-do, we could create the object, but instead of pushing it in this array, right, what we're going to do is we're going to notify the server, hey server, I'm going to make it easy on myself. I'm going to send a GET request, right? I'm going to say, here's a URL, and I'm going to send you the name of the to-do. I'm going to send it to you. I am going to send you the data that I just received from the UI, from the user interface. You store it in some array, not here. Right? We're not going to store it in a local array here in the browser. You, server, store it in some array, maybe even in a database table. Okay? And if you are successful, the server will take a couple milliseconds to do this, right? It's going to respond to us, says, hey, yes, I was able to do it. Right? If they're successful, they're going to call us back. They're going to call us back with all the to-dos. They're going to call us back. Here are all the to-dos. And then I'm going to send the scope. I'm going to say scope, the to-dos according to the server. It says the to-dos, according to the server, it's all these to-dos. But who knows that? The server knows of all those. I don't know them. Okay? I'm passing the responsibility to a server. Make sense? Yes? Are you still with me? Okay. Really, I would use a post, right? But again, I'm taking the liberty here to do something in the next 6 minutes. So we can go back to the server here and listen for an incoming. Listen for an incoming GET that starts with to do, right? That's what it says, right? It starts with to do. The URL that is going to the server starts with to do, then follows with some name. See that? Name meaning some placeholder. Notice the colon, meaning that this is not a hard-coded string, right? It's something that I can parse out. And I put here create to do. So it's a function that is going to handle that. And here's a function. Function. To do. That is going to receive a request and response. Right? I'm going to retrieve the name from the URL. I'm going to retrieve the name from the URL by saying it's in the request, it's in the parameters, and the parameter is called name. Meaning take that URL, parse out the elements that map it out. Right now that I have the name, now I can do what the client was doing. Right? It was going to create a to-do object, right, with the name, right, and it's going to push it. You're going to push it in some array. Here, right? It's right here. Is this array of to-dos? I don't have that anymore on the client. It really is going to live on the server. Now, there's no scope, right? Scope, that's an Angular thing, right? That's a browser thing. The server doesn't know anything about the browser. So this worked, right? I'm adding the array, the new to-do to the array. It generated this request, is waiting for a response, right? We're going to send back in the response, either the response, I'm going to send back the to-dos. I'll send back the to-dos, which includes the to-do that I just created, right? If I refresh, actually I need to restart the server because I just modified the server. Let's restart the server. This is going to ask me, are you sure you want to stop the current? Yes, and don't bother me again, right? So yes, every time I want to restart the server. Yes. Did I? Oh, I didn't. Thank you. Yep. Let me restart. Okay. So let's refresh. And it's interesting to look at the network. Look at the network. You can see the traffic between the client and the server, right? So if we say here teach and say new to do, notice that we just generated a query. See that went out to the server. Went out to the server. Notice the URL that we generated. We generated that URL, didn't we? Right? And as a response, we bound it. We bound it to scope to-dos, right? And it was the view gets updated. The view gets rendered. So notice that now, right? If I teach 1, 2, 3, a new to-do. If I refresh, it's not there, right? But actually it is, right? If I keep adding to-dos, notice that all three are there. See that? Right? Because I don't have the mechanism that when I first reload, what should it do? Go fetch all the to-dos. If I refresh, right? Yes. Sorry. Yes. Yeah. There's a mechanism for there's a version of JSON that is binary, that is much more precise, not as verbose as yes. It's called BSON. So JSON, BSON. So that means that when it loads, when this first loads, one cool thing to do would be to do just this. To just get. So let's do that. When the controller first starts, when the controller just first starts, one good thing to do is right away, regardless of any logic, loads to first go fetch all the to-dos from the server, right? So we can say get, and this would say something like to-dos, right? And this would be success. Same thing as returns all the to-dos, and then binds all the to-dos from the server. Right. So now if I refresh, it doesn't work. It's complaining, saying that the server doesn't know about these to-dos, right? It hasn't been mapped. It's right. Computers are very explicit. They don't do what I expect them to do. They do what they're told to do. So yeah, so we can change this. That listens for to-dos, and we're going to call that get all to-dos, right? And that function get all to-dos, receives the request and response requests. And the only thing that it does is just going to respond. All right, so let me restart. Refresh. Notice that they're gone because I restarted the server. Right? I restart the server, RAM goes away. I don't have the to-dos anymore. But if I have 1, 2, 3, and I have a whole bunch of these, right? Notice if I refresh the page, notice that it gets re-rendered coming from the server. That's the first query that goes out to the server. Right? Yes.
So is our assignment important to like your position now on WS3 instead?
Yeah, it would be more of a server. You would do the assignment going right? Used to do. And used to that, if you don't have a domain name, What we should allow you to choose a domain. But AWS might not. It's okay, it's IP address or whatever name of that server.